On the bottom.
There we go. Hope everyone is okay with that. Thank you for that reminder, Ellen. Um, so I was a very disillusioned math student. I have very clear memories of being in grade 2 and receiving math work back that had a little train stamp on it that said, needs improvement, keep on trying. Um, it was in that time period when we did things like, here's your work, we're going to mark it together as a class. You're going to pass it back to the person behind you and they're going to mark it. And um, it's a little bit sad to me that already in grade 2, I had that immediate feeling that I was not a math person. I was not good at this. And I was embarrassed that it was hard. Um, there was, as many of my high school friends could attest to, a lot of crying for me in math. I survived through a lot of what Peter Liljedahl will tell us was mimicking. I memorized how to do things. I didn't really have a good understanding of what I was doing or why I was doing it, but I just knew I had to do it. So um, I continued in math education all the way up into my first year of university. My university studies was science, microbiology, and so I had to take first year applied mathematics. So I kind of took math for like the people who weren't going to be math people. And thought that my math days were kind of behind me. I started off in my teaching career as a science teacher, which had a little bit of math, but I felt like I could handle that, the chemistry math. And then through strange fates, I found myself as an instrumental music teacher with a grade 8 homeroom. And in Ontario and in Canada, when you're a homeroom teacher, that means you teach all the core subjects. So I had to teach language arts, I had to teach science, I had to teach social studies, I had to teach health, I had to teach drama, I had to teach dance, and I had to teach math. And so I did what every good first year teacher does. I cracked open my textbook and I taught through the textbook, and I taught the way I had been taught until I had this moment, probably into my second year teaching math. And I looked out on my students' faces, and the looks on their faces echoed how I had felt. And so I knew I had to make a change. And so I started on a journey myself. And only just now in my 40s and late 30s did I discover a whole different side of math, about being creative and debating and joy and questions and patterns and the way numbers work. So now that I have discovered that for myself, that's why I'm here, is to share that with the rest of you and my students and my colleagues and pretty much any person that will listen to me talk for more than 5 minutes. This is the evolution of my classroom. So the left-hand side, you can see that I was very much taught the way I taught the way I had been taught. So there was a lot of come in, do the question on the board, copy it down, I'll do an example, we'll do an example, you'll do an example. It was very specific in this is how you need to do it. It was very linear and cut and dry. And now, through the evolution of what I have learned and experienced as an educator and as a leader, is on the right-hand side, you'll see where I hope my students and I's classroom is going. So my classroom is very chaotic. It's loud. There's a lot of buzz. There's a lot of conversation. There's a lot of debating. I'm going to show you a little bit of some of the things that I do and have done to help build this different community, which was very different for most of my students, coming from even within my school, very traditional math classrooms into this sort of whole new way of thinking. So in order to do this, kind of to make this change, we want to think about really what learning is. And this past year, as we know, we've gone through this whole revolution of what school looks like, what learning can look like. And as part of my learning, I read the Distance Learning Playbook, which was put out by Hattie and a variety of other educators. If you haven't read it, even if you don't anticipate doing distance learning or having remote learners in the fall, I would highly recommend it. There is also a book that goes along with it. which I just realized is on my bookshelf. That's the most recent one. So the assessment playbook for distance and blended learning. Regardless of what setting you find yourself with your students, this quote, this is something that stood out to me. I'll give you a minute to read it, and just kind of really think about what he's saying here. So if I don't have this. Something that really stood out to me is the line, if school is reduced to a checklist of things to do, students may complete those tasks without developing deep understanding of what learning is. I know when in the first sort of emergency round of pandemic learning in 2020, my online learning was, here's a bunch of tasks, complete them, hand them in. And then I thought back, that had to extend back for me to my classroom. What does learning look like while they're there with me in person? And I had this recognition that this disconnect between what learning is and how school runs and what school is, this was kind of a breaking open for me of giving myself freedom and giving ourselves freedom to really reimagine what any curriculum classroom can look like. But for me, particularly the math classroom, because the math classroom, I feel, is so tightly regulated and so stereotyped in what it should look like and what it should be, that it's hard to imagine being able to make change in it. I keep this in the back of my mind all the time. Am I just asking my students to complete a checklist of things? And if I'm asking them to do those things, why am I asking them to do them? What is important about them? I want to share with you a little video. You may have seen this before. With the way my screen sharing is going, I don't have it in presentation mode. It should still play. There is one expletive in it. I will just warn you. But I just want to show you this little video. And I have the sound going, so hopefully you can hear it.
What is this job? And they say, okay, here's what we need you to do. We need you to make children know math. Wow. Do they want to know math? No, they don't want to know it. You need to make them know it against their will while they're exploding sexually and beating the shit out of each other. Who are these children? Just whatever kids live near the building. How much do I get paid? About $10 every 4 years. What if I get really good at it? What happens? Nothing happens.
So this just, I've seen this a few times. It's gone around. A couple different people have made TikToks of this little clip. I actually tried to find the original audio to figure out where this was from, but I couldn't. Certainly, I mean, I can only see like 4 of your faces on the screen right now. Certainly, I think this resonates with us on a lot of different levels, right? Like, oh my gosh, yes. Do they want to know math? No, you have to make them know it against their will. Anybody who's taught middle school, I mean, all grades have their joys, but you know, when you get a bunch of grade 7 boys in a room, I mean, that's what it's like. That felt like a true description to me of what it was like. And then certainly I think we relate to, you know, how much do I get paid? Which kids are these? Just whatever kids are nearby, right? It does make it sound so ridiculous. And I want to love this video, and I do love this video. And the first time I saw it, I laughed because I was like, preach, right? Like, I get it. But then I had a moment and I thought, would this be as universally funny if it wasn't about math? Would this be a funny TikTok if it was, we need you to make kids know science? Do they want to know science? No, they don't want to know it. Like, I think this video captures a lot of what how people feel about math and learning math. No, we don't want to know it. You have to force it into their heads against their will. I think that says something almost sort of tragic about the way kids and people view math. You have to be forced to learn it. As teachers, we might love it, but we have to force the kids that we have in our room to love it. There has to be something different. I think there is something different. So while this makes me laugh a little bit and I resonate, yeah, what happens if I get really good at it? Nothing happens. Okay, we just keep on. But I think there's also something tragic about it. I don't want kids to feel like I'm forcing them to know math. I want kids to come into my room and go, yes, we get to learn math today. And I think you're all here because you would like your kids to know that too. Any good professional development with teachers?
Oh my goodness.
Going around the
I
track.
feel like I'm in some 1960s house, like one of these exercise gimmicks.
So the ball, you have to keep the ball up in the air, spinning around and around. So you do that for say a half hour.
Mute. There we go. So I want to contrast that with a little bit of one of my favorite movie clips. This totally does age me. It's not very long. I am going to play it for you. We might resonate with this on a little different level.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of...
Oops. Play.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the... Anyone? The Great Depression, passed the... Anyone? A tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which anyone raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
So, oh my gosh, this guy kills me. Okay. I mean, number one, like the number of times I have felt like I was standing in front of a classroom and like you ask a question and like the kids just stare at you like that face of the first kid and you're kind of like, I have said this line in my classroom, right? Anyone? And you're looking and nothing is happening and they're just staring at you. But I think, this is a whole different view. This teacher is the sort of like doing what I think our tendency is we ask the questions and then we answer the questions. The thinking that these kids are being asked to do, this is a movie, yes, of course, Hollywood, it's very over the top exaggerated, but I do know that one of the biggest challenges I encountered when I first started really blowing open the doors of my teaching practice in mathematics was the kids expected me to do the thinking. They were used to and expected that I would stand at the front, that I would ask a question, that I would maybe wait 30 seconds and then I would tell them what to do. And when I started asking them to do the thinking, they were mad. They were like, this is hard. I don't want like when can we just use the textbook, Mrs. Dean? Can we just have a worksheet? Well, why? Why do you want that? And I realize it's because asking them to do the thinking is new and it's hard, but it is, oh, it's worth it. They were expecting me to be the Ferris Bueller's Day Off teacher. And then I asked them to do something entirely different. So I titled my talk and I think about my goal as creating classrooms of joy. So I did a Google search. How do we define joy? So you can see it there. The emotion invoked by well-being, success, the prospect of possessing what one desires. It does have a little bit about the state of happiness, a source or cause of delight. One of the things that I think is really, really important is that having a joyful classroom is not the same as fun. It also doesn't mean easy. Is it going to be happy? Is there going to be happiness? Yes. Is there going to be fun? Sometimes. I mean, fun is all in the eye of the beholder, right? But I want you to remember, and what I strive to remember every day is that I'm not here to entertain anybody in my classroom, but I am here to help you grow and learn. And kids are like, are we gonna do something fun today, Mrs. Dean? No, there's no fun here. They're like, some of my students actually said to me at one point, like, Mrs. Dean, like, when are you putting out your textbook called like how to find fun and how to kill it? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, they're joking, of course, because goodness knows if you walked into my classroom, there's a lot of hilarity ensuing. But I have always been upfront with my students, like, my goal is not for you to have fun. My goal is for you to experience joy. And joy comes from that productive struggle of high expectations and doing the thinking and coming to an end or coming to learn something, growing, changing. Everybody's going to do that in a different way. Your joy is going to come in a different time than somebody else's joy, but we can all achieve that. We can get there together. These two little images keep popping up all over for me. The side one, children don't hate math. What they hate is being confused, intimidated, and embarrassed by math. I wish I had written that myself so I could trademark it, but I think this is a really key thing. And I started asking my students about this whenever I had that response of, oh, I hate this. Oh, I don't like this. And I would say to them, is it really the thing you do, the subject, the learning you're doing, or is it that you don't like the way you're feeling right now? And they were able to, by the end of the year, they were able to tell me that, like, I'm confused. I don't like how that feels. Somewhere along the line too, I think we equated our jobs to make things easier. We don't want kids to feel uncomfortable. We don't want them to have that sense of, I don't know what to do. We do want them to do that, but we don't want them to be intimidated and embarrassed. We want them to feel safe and struggle and know that we're there with them. I don't think kids hate numbers. I don't think they hate math. They hate what they have come to think of as math class. And then this little mushroom, I'm not sure why it's a mushroom, but what stands out to me with this little image here with the mushroom sitting at a desk is that sense of, okay, he's got this little problem in front of him, so he's just going to do the standard algorithm, the procedure that he knows, and he does it, and he finds himself in the same situation. How many times do our students do the standard algorithm on things when there could be a different way? So for me, these two things sort of capture some of the essence of how we can bring back joy and reimagine what our classrooms can look like. So it comes down to changing the story about what teaching math is like for both us as teachers and for parents, and also for our students. we've come to think of teaching math as a super linear kind of pathway. I think now we're recognizing, you can see the bottom is very messy, what what I think teaching math should be, this kind of winding pathway through investigating problems and making observations and asking questions and circling back around on itself. It does require a certain amount of being willing to kind of step outside of what we have known and what students have known. And it involves rethinking about how we organize things. So what I want to share with you in the last sort of second half here, as I've sort of set the foundation for why I think we need to make these changes, is places where we can start. And where I started with my students and where I encourage my colleagues who want to start making some of these changes. And I really firmly believe that it comes down to starting off your classroom with something that's going to ask questions. So these are 3 examples of ways I started off my classroom at the this year. So on the farmost side, you can see the watermelons. You can, this is an image from the Steve Whitnery account. He has all these really interesting photos that he's sort of constructed out of a variety of objects. The next image is one I found later in the year, and we had a whole, like, I feel like 50-minute debate in my class about the dog wearing pants and which way the dog would wear the pants if dogs were going to wear pants. I know later today, there is a session on the sandwich debate. I listened to debates about what things were sandwiches pretty much the whole entire year in my classroom, starting on like the first day of school. This image about the dog wearing pants and whether or not a piece of pizza folded in half constituted a sandwich, those are the places of joy and mathematical thinking, because it's debate. It's, well, what does the pattern say? What do the rules say? Who defines what makes a sandwich? You know, if a dog is going to wear pants, the number of kids who are very concerned about like where the pockets were on the pants, like how do humans wear pants? Well, we don't wear pants like along the midline of ourselves. They're making connections to other people who wear pants. And they're like, you know, if I asked them at the beginning of the year, the kids have probably been like, what is she saying? But as you build these exercises with your kids, you are going to see their thinking change. The things I love about these pictures and the prompt of simply saying, what do you notice? What do you wonder? Every single kid in your classroom can answer this question. Every single kid can look at that picture of watermelons and say, I see watermelons. Fantastic. Let me write that on the board. That's one thing that we notice, is that we see watermelons. Every single kid in your room can say, I see berries. One of the things that is the very first way to build joy into your classroom is to make it a place where every single kid can participate in what you're asking them to do. At the beginning of the year, when I first started these kinds of what do you notice, what do you wonder questions, which was new to my students, you do inevitably get that. I see red. I see blue. And at the beginning, some kids kind of think, well, I'm going to say that because they think, well, I'm just going to state the obvious, and you're going to give them that thank you, Captain Obvious response. But I don't. Every single kid's answer is validated. Yes, we do see red. That's important. When I do this, when I'm teaching in person, I have this displayed on my whiteboard. I often write the students' names or initials next to their contributions, because building the community of kids who are going to be joyful and ask questions and take risks involves them feeling like they see themselves in the classroom. So yeah, I did get a kid who said, I see watermelons. But then I also had I wonder how many watermelons there are. I wonder, where are the missing pieces of the watermelons? I wonder, are those watermelons that we can only see halves of, are they actually halves, or are they quarters that have been turned on their sides? Are those pieces actually the watermelon pieces that have been sliced out and rotated? The picture of the berries, I showed my students relatively late in the school year because, and I want to show you where we went with it. Sometimes I start off questions, with the dog in the pants, and the kids are like, what does this have to do with math? We talk about the debating and justifying. The picture with the berries, when I was doing this one, I chose to have the image displayed on the Explain Everything app because I had kids downstairs. I was teaching hybrid. I had kids in a different room at the same time. So I recorded their ideas here, and I asked them, what do you notice? What do you wonder? And then I asked them, what math do you see? And so we can see some of the questions that were popping up there. I see multiplication, I see arrays, I see fractions. Why is it organized this way? How much does this cost? And so what I asked students to do the next day was I asked them to choose a question that was on the screen, either their own or someone else's, and figure it out. So I put this back up and kids chose a question, and we spent a good hour of kids doing the math that they wanted to do. So I had kids figuring out percentages of red to the other colors, how many were raspberries. I had kids try to figure out how much this would cost. They were a little bit boggled by trying to find like what prices of berries there were, and we had to make an assumption. How big are these containers? Are they quart? Are they, they half? Are they, what volume of berries do they hold? You can take something like an image like this, or the watermelon picture, or even the dog picture, and then run with it. Let the kids pick a math question to figure out about it. I had them write all their answers up on the board, and then they compared, because I had several different students try to determine the cost. We had a whole bunch of different answers. So then we had to, step back and do a bit of a debate about, like, well, how did you get your prices? Where are they from? What assumptions did you make? Within this one picture, my class experienced connections to fractions and decimals and percentages, but also communicating and multiplication. I had, for some kids, the level that they were at, I did have some kids whose answer was, or whose question they wanted to investigate was how many boxes of berries there were. And so I had kids who were just simply taking the time to figure out, well, this was a 5 by 5 array, and therefore there was 25 boxes of berries. And that was their learning for the day. Everyone's learning was validated. Everyone's went up on the board. Everyone experienced part of the learning. And I think that's the key to helping us build these classrooms where kids are willing to take risks and make guesses and make conjectures and be curious, is to do it in a way so that everyone feels like they can make a contribution. I know that there's a lot of conversation in Ontario right now about de-streaming grade 9. Those of us who teach in the elementary panel or the middle school panel, I mean, my classroom is this huge wide range of students and their knowledge. And kids are all over the place. Being able to choose tasks that can encompass all the things that all of our kids want to know about, those are the things that are going to help us build that joy. The first moment I experienced with really having kids experience joy unexpectedly was with this image. This is, if you haven't seen it, the prime climb chart that if you take a look at it, I know some of the numbers are small, but what you'll see represented here is all the numbers 1 to 100 with a visual representation of all of their prime factors. And when I first show this to kids, this is usually the first or second day of school. Usually just show the first 10 or the first 20, and we have a conversation about do we notice and what do we wonder? And the first time I showed this to a group of students, when they came to the realization that this was actually a representation of multiplication and their times tables, they were like blown away when they looked at the 10 and saw there was a blue and an orange, and that meant that 10 was made up of 5 times 2. They were like, and then to go through and see, to look at the 12, for example, and see there's a 2 and a 2 and a 3. So that means to get 12, I could do 4 times 3. It means I could do 6 times 2. They could see all of those factors that they'd spent so much time struggling to memorize without understanding represented here. Earlier this year, I suggested in a blog post that I didn't think kids needed to memorize times tables, which of course is one of those things that causes some angst on both sides. And I would say that I hold true to that. I don't think rote memorization of times tables is what we want or need our kids to do. Instead, what I would rather see kids do is build an understanding of multiplication this way. And showing my kids this and telling them this and having them play around with this. And then I had kids make their own chart, and the solidification of things that comes from that alone is worth it. That statement or that idea or showing them this turned my students' perceptions of what math meant or what numbers were on its head. They saw for the first time that there was multiple ways to get to the answer of their understanding that they needed. And by giving them the permission for me to say, you know what, it's okay if it takes you time to figure this out. It's okay if you don't have them all memorized. We'll work through different strategies. It's okay if you're still working on seeing how numbers work together. That's okay. Changing our students' perceptions of what math is I mean, you can't get better than that as far as helping them being willing to step into your math classroom and expect something different. This is also a little exercise I had my students do. This is the Weave Silk website. There's a great app for tablets as well. And we spent lots of time just playing around with this. And I had students like, they wanted to explore, and the shapes and the patterns that they came up with and that they were seeing, all of my students could enter into this. And we spent time just playing around with it. And as they did that, I sort of would walk around and take photos and kind of tease out some of their learning or ideas of, what do you see here? Why does this look like this? You know, what patterns are there? What shapes do you see? Again, simple ways that we can have kids experience math in a different way. Even as like a, Friday afternoon, like, let's just play around with this and see where we go. Those give kids the opportunity to sort of play around with it. And you can see like one of the kids, who's clearly a Lord of the Rings fan, right, made the Eye of Sauron out of his weave silk. And I was like, that's impressive. So I had to take a photo of that. But letting kids play, I mean, grade 7s love to play. Grade 12s love to play. They just won't tell you it. But, and they'll kind of roll their eyes at you. I know my grade 12s used to roll my eyes, like, oh, it's secretly inside. They actually love it. They won't tell you it, but, giving them permission to play and yourself permission to play, there's much joy to be had and stories that you can tell with these things. So if we're thinking about making our classroom a place of joy, I think that my number one idea that I'm hoping you'll take away is that how you start in the first 5 minutes of your classroom and how the kids enter is how you're going to get there. So for me, for the first 5 minutes of any class, whether I have 30 minutes of time with my students for math or an hour, or whether I have the freedom in my schedule to have 3 periods of math, we always start with something that is immediately they are required to think. And that's part of, if you've read Peter Liljedahl's work, he's a big proponent of that too, right? Within the first 5 minutes, the students are thinking about something. I love to have them start with something that's an interesting, what do you notice, what do you wonder, a math puzzle, a Sudoku, an image they haven't seen before, something that is getting them to ask questions, to think about, outside the box. And you get to that point where kids start to make connections to other things. If we think back to sort of my planning picture that was like, what teaching math is like, I love to break apart the mold of teaching in linear and having my concepts weave together, because then kids look at a picture. I've shown the same picture 3 different times throughout the course of a school year, and the things they notice and wonder are different based on what their learning is. They draw connections to other things. And I love that by the end of the school year, I had kids say to me, oh, I think this might be wrong, but I'm going to say it anyways. I'm like, great. Let's say what's on our minds. Let's say what we're thinking. Let's ask our questions. But starting off for 5 minutes right away, giving them that sense of, we're going to do something different in here. It's going to be noisy. It's going to be chaos, but it's going to be great. We're going to learn some things together. I said at the beginning that I love to talk about assessment, and I haven't talked about assessment a lot today because I wanted to talk more about how you can start to build joy in your classroom. But I also firmly believe that if we're going to change the way we teach, we have to change the way we assess. And I do think that we can make assessment a joyful experience for students by being willing to think about what we really mean by assessment. What are we assessing? Why are we assessing it? What are we valuing? What are we saying? If we're saying we're going to value kids taking risks and asking questions and making conjectures, we have to make sure that that's what our assessment is also focusing on. So these are some of my ideas, a little bit about joyful assessment. I hope if the assessment piece is something that you want to talk more about, anybody, again, nobody here in this Zoom has ever met me in person, but my colleagues would tell you that if you start me on the assessment conversation, I hope you have a lot of coffee with you, because it's going to be a long conversation. I'm just going to keep on going. You can probably tell like the level of like in my voice. I think because of my experience as a student, disrupting the narrative of what assessment looks like in math classrooms and any classroom, really, this is a big step and a big change that needs to happen. And it's probably the scariest one of all. Working with teachers and coaches, coaching other teachers, being willing to change our teaching strategy and make it about creativity is a thing everyone feels they can do. And then when we come to okay, now we need to talk about how we're doing our assessment and why we're doing it. That's the hard piece. So if you're thinking about this, if some of this is resonating with you and you would want to talk more about assessment, feel free to contact me on Twitter, send me an email, I'll share that at the end. I want to share with you, to end off today, a real life game-changing moment that I wrote about more extensively on my blog. So if you want to read about it, it has been on my life's bucket list to know how to solve a Rubik's Cube. So 2 years ago, I bought a Rubik's Cube and I took it out of the package and it sat on my desk and I looked at it and it was solved, It was kind of, like the picture you see there. It sat on my desk and my kid said, Mrs. Dean, do you know how to solve a Rubik's Cube? And I said, no, I don't. And I was like, lots of people have shown me, but I really don't get it. So I'm like, I don't know how to do it. And so it sat there for almost a whole entire school year. And this past school year, I had a bunch of grade 7 boys who were super into Rubik's Cubes. And so they were constantly taking it off my desk and solving it. And they said to me, Mrs. Dean, why do you have this if you don't know how to do it? And I was like, that's a really good question. And I recognized that inside of me, despite what I was saying as a teacher, I was holding back because I didn't know how to do it. And the thought, I thought, well, I could Google it. Is that cheating if I Google it? If I watch a video, ugh. But I said, you know what, okay, guys, it was a long weekend. It was the May long weekend, I think, here in Canada. And I said, okay, this is my goal over the weekend. I'm going to learn how to solve this thing. So it came to the Monday afternoon, and I still hadn't done it because I don't even know at that point what I was worried about. But I sat down with a video. I found a tutorial, and it took me all day to get here. So I got the bottom two layers, and I kept trying to do the top layer and I couldn't do it. It was confusing. I was annoyed, but I kept trying. Eventually I was just like, okay, I have to put this down for a bit. And then the next day, sure enough, the kids in my class were like, Mrs. Dean, you said you were going to learn how to solve Rubik's Cube. Did you do it? And I was like, I got to here. And they're like, okay, well, you're so close. Just keep going. So on a recess break, I watched the same video over and over again, and I solved it. And the kids were so excited for me. And I was the sheer joy that burst out of my being by solving this. I couldn't even really put it into words. And I realized that process of what I went through was what I wanted my students to do. They had a thing they wanted to know about. I had a thing I wanted to know about. I asked people to help me. My students showed me a few times. I watched a tutorial. It was hard. There were moments where I hated it because I was frustrated. But I also knew I really wanted to do it. And so I kept trying. And then I got to it. And I got to the end. And now I can do 2 layers without, I still have to watch the video to do the top layer. I can't figure that part out yet. That process of wanting to know something, finding the resources, doing it myself, that for me was a game-changing moment when I recognized this is what I want my classroom to feel like. They need to experience this joy. So that is what I set out to do. Within, obviously, we have to innovate within inside the box of the education system, right? Like we can't just throw things out. I have to write report cards. I have to follow the curriculum. But the way I get there, the way we get there can be like solving that Rubik's Cube the first time. And no matter how many times I solve it now, I still feel joy. I still look at it and go, I solved it. I'm still surprised when it works. When I work to the end and I get there, it still surprises me. I think I've solved it like 30 or 40 times now. It still surprises me. So in parting, some things to think about from the very beginning, right? The things that we want to consider, how our room is organized, how we're going to set up our learning, the way it begins, what your role is, how you're going to assess it. Those are all the pieces we have to start to think about. We want to start as we intend to continue. So my first day of school this year, I just discovered the beauty of the Soma Cube puzzle. If you haven't experienced the Soma Cube puzzle, look it up because you can do it with it's this essentially, I know we're short on time. I had a colleague actually 3D printed me the pieces but you can make them out of snap cubes. There's 7 modular pieces that are made of 4 cubes. There's one that's 3. There are 240 different ways you can arrange these 7 pieces into a cube. I discovered this just this year. So we spent time as a class this year building Soma cubes. And as I said, I had a colleague 3D print me some. My first day of school in September is going to be a bunch of boxes that we're going to put together, and we're going to make a classroom sized Soma cube. Because I can't think of a better way to set the tone for my math class than saying, hey guys, here's a problem. Let's figure this out together and learn and grow together. We have to start the way we want to go on. So if I want my classroom to be a place where we spend time tackling big problems, like 240 different ways to make a cube out of these pieces, then that's how we're going to do it. So in leaving, to finish off, we know this idea, right? How to be a math person, do some math, be a person. We know that math is numbers and equations and formula. Yes, that's what kids expect the answer to be, but it's so much more than that. The creativity, the messiness, the problematic parts of it, the patterns, the taking these pieces and throwing them because you're frustrated, but then picking them back up again because you want to get there. That's what I want my students to be able to see. Because when kids say to me, Mrs. Dean, when am I ever going to use this in real life? That feeling of, I have a thing I need to do, I want to do it, but it's making me mad. That's what our kids need to know, right? Any content, any formulas, they can Google those. As teachers, we want to present kids with Soma Cube puzzles and have them be frustrated and annoyed by it, but also want to get to the end and experience the joy of it. And there's a picture of some of my students making the Soma Cube pieces and working on it. So I know we're at the end of our time. Thank you so much for spending your Saturday with me. I hope it has helped you see some possibilities for your room. I've been super terrible at monitoring the chat. So if you have questions and ideas, feel free, please, to send me a message. You can find me on Twitter at the Dean of Math, Dean_Math. That's my email, my medean@hsd.ca. I did record this. I will post these slides as well. Please continue the conversation. I will be happy to talk and learn with and from all of you. Thank you for being here. I will let you now take a break before your next session, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Mm-hmm.